Good evening, and welcome back to Futurelore. Tonight, we gather not just to hear a story, but to step into a vast and mysterious current of history, a current that carries us through science, philosophy, and dream. Settle yourself into comfort, let the noise of your day drift to the edges, and allow the cadence of this voice to become your companion. For the next few hours, you will be guided through a tale that is as much about imagination as it is about invention. It is a tale of a man whose mind refused to accept the boundaries of his age, a man whose visions were too vast to be contained within the iron frames of laboratories or the ledgers of investors. That man is Nikola Tesla. Most people know Tesla as the wizard of electricity, the pioneer of alternating current, the rival of Thomas Edison, and the dreamer of wireless power. They picture him standing beneath the crackle of lightning from his coils, arms outstretched like a modern Prometheus, summoning fire from the heavens. But there is another Tesla, less celebrated, more elusive, and perhaps more radical, a Tesla who believed in the ether, a Tesla who insisted that the universe itself was not empty space, but a living sea of energy waiting to be tapped. Tonight, we turn our focus to this side of Tesla's mind, his ether theory. We will trace it from its ancient roots to the fevered laboratories of the late 19th century, from the applause of admirers to the silence of his fall from grace. We will feel the pull of his conviction that all matter, all force, all light, and life are carried on invisible waves within a cosmic ocean, and we will follow him as he tried, again and again, to reveal it to the world. This is not only science, it is mythology clothed in equations, it is philosophy disguised as engineering, and it is tragedy, for the world that once called Tesla a genius would later cast him aside, dismissing his ethereal visions as the fantasies of a fallen star. Yet the question lingers, like a whisper in the night. What if he was right? So, breathe deeply, and let us begin not in the roaring streets of New York, but in the stillness of the human imagination. Let us wander back through centuries to the origin of the very word ether, and see how the dream of an invisible medium was planted long before Tesla's birth. The element of the gods. In the beginning there were five: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. To the ancient Greeks, ether was the pure, divine substance that filled the heavens, while mortals walked upon soil, breathed air, and kindled flame. The gods were said to dwell in a realm suffused with a finer essence. Aristotle called it the fifth element, the quintessence, unchanging and eternal. It was in this medium, philosophers believed, that stars swam and planets revolved. Without ether, how could light travel? How could the music of the spheres reach mortal ears? Even as centuries passed and science replaced myth, the belief endured: space could not be nothing. There must be something, some unseen sea through which all waves of light and force flowed. From Alexandria to Baghdad, from the monasteries of Europe to the observatories of the Renaissance, scholars debated the nature of this medium. Was it the breath of God? Was it the fabric of reality? Descartes imagined swirling vortices of subtle matter filling the void. Newton spoke of an ether that could explain the action of gravity itself. By the 19th century, the concept had evolved into the luminiferous ether, the supposed substance through which light waves propagated like ripples across a pond. And it was into this intellectual climate that Nikola Tesla was born, a child destined to seize upon the ancient dream and twist it into visions the world had never seen. The Storm Child. Tesla entered the world on the night of a storm, July 10th, 1856, in the village of Smiljan. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the house, and his mother labored by candlelight. The midwife, startled by the tempest, is said to have declared, This child will be a child of the storm. To which his mother replied, no, he will be a child of the light. Whether this story is fact or folklore, it is fitting. For Tesla would spend his life chasing lightning, commanding electricity, and seeking illumination beyond the ordinary. His earliest memories were of visions, blinding flashes that overwhelmed his senses. At times they tormented him, at times they inspired him. He could see entire machines in his mind, turn them around, disassemble and reassemble them, all before ever touching a tool. But it was not only mechanics that haunted him. Tesla grew convinced, even as a boy, that there was something alive in the air, something subtle, yet powerful. He would stand by the rushing streams of his homeland, feeling the vibrations of water and wind, and imagine that unseen currents moved through the sky as well. He called them forces, but in truth, he already sensed the presence of the ether. From ancient dream to modern science. By the mid-19th century, science was racing forward. Michael Faraday had revealed the invisible fields of electricity and magnetism. James Clerk Maxwell had unified them with equations that spoke of waves traveling through space. And yet, how could waves exist in nothingness? Even the most modern physicists of Tesla's youth insisted that an ether must be there, a cosmic jelly or invisible lattice filling the universe. For Tesla, this was not an abstract assumption, but a reality waiting to be touched. He devoured Maxwell's works, he pored over Faraday's experiments, and he began to dream not of engines that burned coal, but of systems that drank directly from the currents of nature. What if one could tune into the frequency of the earth? What if towers could draw power from the air and distribute it without wires, without fuel, without end? The seed of the dream was ancient, but in Tesla's hands it would grow into something both terrifying and sublime: the restless mind. As Tesla matured, his visions grew sharper. He suffered from illnesses of the body and torments of the mind, but through them he refined his ability to imagine. He could retreat into his inner world and find comfort there. While others tinkered with crude motors, Tesla was constructing entire power plants in his imagination, guided by the conviction that the universe was suffused with energy humanity had barely begun to grasp. It is easy now to look back with skepticism, to say that Tesla was chasing ghosts, that the ether was a scientific dead end. But imagine the world as he saw it, a world of candlelight, steam, and the first telegraphs. To him, the idea that the universe might hum with hidden power was not strange. It was inevitable. And so, as he prepared to set forth on his journey from Europe to America, Tesla carried more than a suitcase. He carried a vision, a whisper of the ether, a dream that the very void between stars could become humanity's greatest ally. A pause for reflection. Here, dear listener, let us pause. You are hearing the beginning of a saga that will twist through triumph and heartbreak. Tesla's life is a tapestry of victories that dazzled the world and defeats that left him in obscurity. But through every chapter runs a single thread: his conviction that the ether was real and that by harnessing it, humanity could ascend to a new era. Close your eyes, if you have not already, and picture him. A tall, slender man, dark eyes burning with intensity, pacing the corridors of his mind while the rest of the world slept. He is listening, not to the voices of his peers, but to the hum of something deeper. And he is determined at all costs to make that hum audible to us all. This is where our journey begins. The mountains of Lika rise like silent sentinels above the valleys, where streams carve their way through green fields and stone villages cling to the earth. It was here, in this rugged region of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that Nikola Tesla spent his earliest years. The world around him was one of contrasts: harsh winters and radiant summers, deep poverty and deep faith, the monotony of village life punctuated by the sudden violence of storms. Tesla was not an ordinary child. From the moment he could speak, his parents recognized something uncanny in him. He was restless, curious, and often lost in thought. Yet what most distinguished him were the visions. At times when he heard a word or saw a scene, images would blaze in his mind with overwhelming clarity. A single phrase could summon a landscape so vivid that it blocked out reality. A casual mention of an object could conjure it in exact detail before his eyes. These hallucinations, as he called them, were both torment and gift. They left him sleepless, but they also trained him to hold and shape ideas with extraordinary precision. His mother, Juka, understood more than most. Though she had never learned to read or write, she possessed a genius for invention. In their small household, she designed tools and gadgets that made work easier, her hands turning necessity into creativity. Nikola would later say that whatever inventive skill he had came not from his celebrated father, but from her, the woman who spun miracles from wood and thread. His father, Milutin, was a stern Orthodox priest, a man of letters and sermons. From him, Tesla inherited eloquence, discipline, and the capacity for long, solitary reflection. Yet Tesla's youth was not without shadows. He was haunted by death. At the age of 5, he witnessed the death of his older brother Dane, who was considered the more gifted child. Dane's sudden passing shook the household, and in its wake, Nikola was left with both the burden of expectation and the ache of survivor's guilt. He grew quiet, withdrawn, and the visions intensified. At night, he would lie in bed, overcome by flashes of light that seemed to pour from the darkness itself. He told his parents of these disturbances, but who could explain them? They only urged him to pray. Prayer was not enough. Tesla turned inward, developing exercises to control his mind. He forced himself to master the images, to bend them to his will. In time, what had been a torment became a discipline. He discovered that he could construct entire machines within his mind, rotate them, test their movements, and detect flaws without ever drawing a sketch. He had forged, through necessity, the talent that would one day astonish the world, the lure of the invisible. The village of Smiljan was surrounded by nature that seemed alive with mystery. Tesla would spend hours by the streams, watching the current ripple over stones, fascinated by the play of forces unseen. He noticed that a stick placed in the water vibrated with a rhythm that seemed almost musical. He watched lightning split the sky, and wondered not only at its brightness, but at its structure, its power. Unlike other children, he did not merely gape at storms. He felt them. At times, he spoke of strange sensations, as if currents ran through his body, as if the air itself carried hidden energies. He could not prove these feelings, but they stayed with him. Even as a child, he was convinced that the space around us was not empty. He did not yet have the word, but what he was sensing was the ether. Tesla's father, hoping to guide his son toward a stable life, insisted he study for the priesthood. But Nikola rebelled. His passion was for machines. He begged for books on science. He devoured stories of inventors, and when he discovered the writings of Faraday and Maxwell, he was spellbound. Here, at last, was language for the forces he felt. Fields, waves, currents. These were not fantasies, but realities. The invisible could be known. The plague and the bargain. As a teenager, Tesla fell gravely ill with cholera. For 9 months, he lingered on the edge of death, his body racked with fever, his mind consumed with visions more intense than ever. At one point, his father despaired. In desperation, Milutin promised his son that if he recovered, he would not force him into the priesthood. Instead, Nikola could pursue engineering, the dream he had cherished in secret. That promise became Tesla's anchor. He clung to it, willed himself back from death, and when he finally recovered, he set out to fulfill his part of the bargain. He would study, he would excel, and he would dedicate himself to unlocking the mysteries of the forces that haunted his imagination. The awakening of a seer. At the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Tesla's brilliance bloomed. He astonished his professors by solving complex equations in his head. He immersed himself in the study of electricity, then a field still wrapped in mystery. It was during these years that he first began to imagine alternating current, not as an abstract theory, but as a living rhythm that pulsed through nature itself. Yet even as he pursued practical studies, Tesla's mind drifted toward the unseen. He wrote of feeling that all matter was alive with vibrations. He began to suspect that every particle was suspended in a greater medium. Though his professors laughed at such ideas, he could not abandon them. For him, the ether was not superstition, but intuition, a truth he had felt since childhood. Shadows of genius. Tesla's life in the Balkans was marked by both brilliance and isolation. He dazzled teachers, but alienated peers. He lived in poverty, often going hungry, yet he clothed himself with dignity and spoke with the assurance of someone who knew his destiny. He was haunted, driven, restless. At times he collapsed from overwork, his mind so consumed by ideas that his body simply gave way. And yet through it all, the visions continued. Not hallucinations now, but images of machines, towers, currents flowing invisibly from sky to earth. He saw the future before it could be built. He saw a world where humanity drew power, not from coal or oil, but from the very fabric of the universe. It was a vision that no one around him could understand. But Tesla carried it with him, across borders, across oceans, into the heart of a new world. Reflection. As you listen now, let yourself drift into that world. Picture a young man standing alone in a darkened room, his eyes closed, his mind alive with sparks of light. Imagine the intensity of belief required to see what others could not, to hold fast to a dream, even when family, friends, and teachers doubted him. Tesla's childhood was not merely a prelude to his career. It was the forge in which his conviction in the invisible was hammered into shape. It was in these years that he became not only an inventor, but a seer, a man who would dedicate his life to proving that the emptiness of space was, in truth, full beyond measure. And so the stage is set. The storm child of the Balkans has survived illness, visions, and grief. He carries within him the conviction that space itself hums with hidden energy. Soon he will leave behind the narrow valleys of his homeland for the roaring streets of Europe and then America. And there, the world will begin to see the lightning he had always felt. The Europe of Tesla's youth was alive with transformation. Railroads slashed across the continent, factories belched smoke, and the night skies above cities flickered with the first gas lamps. Steamships plowed across oceans, and telegraph wires stitched nations together with pulses of electricity. The world was waking to a new age, and Nikola Tesla, still a young man, stood at its threshold. At the Technical University in Graz, he immersed himself in the study of electrical engineering. His professors marveled at his ability to memorize entire books, recite formulas flawlessly, and solve problems that baffled others. But what truly set him apart was his imagination. Where others saw diagrams, Tesla saw living systems. He did not merely calculate, he envisioned. He described electric currents as though they were creatures, flowing, pulsing, breathing. It was here that Tesla encountered, in detail, the works of James Clerk Maxwell. Maxwell's equations described electricity and magnetism as two faces of the same force, bound together in a dance of fields and waves. Light itself, Maxwell declared, was an electromagnetic wave. For Tesla, this was revelation. Waves must travel in a medium, just as sound travels in air and ripples move across water. If light was a wave, then what was the medium? The answer, according to every physicist of the day, was the luminiferous ether. Tesla absorbed this idea like scripture. He became convinced that the ether was not only real, but tangible, accessible, and filled with limitless power. To him, it was not a ghostly hypothesis. It was a living ocean of energy. He began to dream of tapping into it, of drawing power from the very fabric of the universe, the spark of alternating current. But before he could chase the ether, Tesla would reshape electricity itself. At the time, the world followed Thomas Edison's lead in using direct current, DC. Simple, steady, but limited. DC could not travel far without losing power, and it demanded thick wires and countless stations. Tesla, however, envisioned a system of alternating current, AC, that pulsed back and forth, carried by waves of energy, capable of traveling vast distances with minimal loss. The idea did not come to him through slow tinkering. It came in a flash. Walking in a park one evening, reciting lines from Goethe's Faust, Tesla suddenly saw in his mind the image of a rotating magnetic field. He grabbed a stick and drew diagrams in the dirt, explaining to a bewildered friend the principle of a motor that could run on AC. He had glimpsed it whole, as if the universe itself had revealed its secret. This was the beginning of Tesla's great crusade. He would spend years perfecting AC motors, generators, and systems. He faced ridicule, rejection, and poverty. Yet he pressed on, certain that alternating current was not only superior, but aligned with the deeper rhythms of nature itself. To him, AC was closer to the language of the ether, the mystical undercurrent. Even as Tesla threw himself into the practical challenges of engineering, he never abandoned the mystical current beneath his thought. He spoke of resonance, of vibrations, of harmony between machines and nature. He claimed that every object in the universe had a natural frequency, and that by tuning into it, one could unlock extraordinary power. This was not idle speculation. Tesla believed resonance was the bridge to the ether. By setting up the right vibrations, one could couple with the medium itself, drawing energy directly from the cosmos. He dreamed of towers that would hum with the frequencies of the earth, transmitting power through the ground and air to every corner of the globe. To most of his contemporaries, these musings sounded like fantasy, but Tesla was undeterred. He had felt the whisper of the ether since childhood, and now science seemed to offer the means to make it sing aloud. Trials and exile. Tesla's path, however, was not smooth. He clashed with professors who dismissed his radical ideas. He drifted from one university to another, struggling with finances, health, and isolation. At times, he disappeared into obsessive work, neglecting food and rest. At others, he collapsed entirely, his body rebelling against the intensity of his mind. But through every trial, the vision endured. Tesla saw beyond the coal smoke and flickering lamps of his day. He saw towers rising into the sky, transmitting power without wires. He saw machines drawing directly from the invisible medium. He saw a world transformed, lifted from drudgery by the harnessing of a universal energy source. And so, with little more than determination and a few letters of introduction, Tesla set his sights on America, the land of opportunity, the land where Edison reigned, the land where he believed his dreams could finally take form. Reflection. As you drift with this story, imagine Tesla walking alone along the Danube, the lights of the city flickering in the distance, the currents of the river whispering at his feet. Imagine the intensity in his eyes as he explains to no one in particular how alternating current will change the world. Imagine the fire in his heart as he declares, silently but firmly, that the ether is real and that he will prove it. This is the Tesla who boards a ship for New York in 1884. A young man of 28, carrying little more than a dream and a vision of waves rippling through the invisible medium of the cosmos. He does not yet know the battles he will face, nor the betrayals, nor the loneliness of the years ahead. But he believes, and for now, that belief is enough to propel him forward. The year was 1884, and the ship Saturnia cut across the Atlantic toward New York. On board was a tall, gaunt figure with sharp eyes and a restless mind. Nikola Tesla carried with him a single suitcase, 4 cents in his pocket, a few poems, a sketch of a flying machine, and a letter of recommendation from Charles Batchelor, his former employer in Paris. The letter was addressed to the most famous inventor in America, Thomas Alva Edison. "Dear Edison," the note declared, "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." For Tesla, America represented both salvation and crucible. Europe had given him education, vision and hardship, but little support. In New York, he believed, the doors of opportunity might finally open. Yet what awaited him was a struggle that would test not only his science, but his soul. A war that would etch his name into history as both victor and victim. Arrival in the electric capital. New York in the 1880s was a city ablaze with energy. Immigrants poured through Ellis Island, skyscrapers clawed upward, and the night sky glowed faintly with the first electric lamps. But this light was limited, confined to small districts powered by Edison's direct current DC systems. Tesla stepped onto the bustling streets with a mixture of awe and determination. He was a stranger here, speaking English with a thick accent, wearing European clothes, and carrying dreams larger than the skyline. He found lodging in a cheap boarding house, and soon presented himself to Edison. The 2 men could not have been more different. Edison, stocky and blunt, prided himself on trial and error, building thousands of prototypes until one worked. Tesla, tall and elegant, relied on his ability to construct machines entirely in his imagination, perfecting them before ever touching a tool. Edison trusted instinct and pragmatism. Tesla trusted vision and principle. Yet for a brief moment, their paths converged. Clash of methods. Edison employed Tesla to improve his DC generators. Tesla worked tirelessly, redesigning machines, eliminating inefficiencies, and dazzling colleagues with his precision. At one point, Edison allegedly promised him $50,000 if he could achieve a series of improvements. Tesla delivered. But when he asked for the reward, Edison laughed. "You don't understand our American humor," Edison quipped. Tesla was humiliated. He resigned, choosing poverty over what he saw as betrayal. For months, he labored as a ditch digger, his brilliant mind wasted on backbreaking toil, his clothes ragged, his health failing. Yet even in the depths of despair, he held fast to his conviction. He knew that direct current was not the future. Alternating current, AC, was. The spark of Westinghouse. Fate shifted when Tesla encountered businessmen who recognized the potential of his AC patents. Word reached George Westinghouse, an industrialist eager to challenge Edison's monopoly. Westinghouse purchased Tesla's patents and invited him to join the cause. With resources and backing at last, Tesla's dream began to take shape. The stage was set for one of the fiercest battles in technological history, the War of Currents. The War of Currents. Edison fought viciously to protect his DC empire. He launched smear campaigns against AC, calling it dangerous and deadly. He arranged public demonstrations in which animals were electrocuted with AC power, hoping to instill fear. He lobbied lawmakers to restrict its use. Tesla and Westinghouse, meanwhile, pressed forward. AC's advantages were undeniable. It could travel long distances with minimal loss, making it ideal for powering entire cities. Slowly, public opinion began to shift. The climax came in 1893, when Westinghouse won the contract to illuminate the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Over 200,000 lamps blazed to life, bathing the fairgrounds in a sea of light. Visitors gasped, mesmerized. The triumph was complete. Alternating current had vanquished direct current. Tesla, standing amid the brilliance, felt vindicated. Yet even in victory, he was restless. For him, AC was not the end but the beginning. It was proof that energy could be transmitted over distances, perhaps even wirelessly. If power could flow through wires stretched across miles, why not through the very air itself? Why not through the ether? The dream of wireless power. Tesla began to dream of systems that would bypass wires entirely. He envisioned towers that could transmit power across continents, ships that could draw energy from the atmosphere, cities illuminated without a single cable. The triumph of AC had proven that the invisible could be harnessed. Now he wanted to leap further, into the medium itself. At lectures, he spoke with fervor about the possibilities. Energy, he insisted, filled the environment all around us. The earth itself vibrated with frequencies that could be tapped. The ether was not empty. It was alive, ready to yield its secrets. He designed coils that sent sparks leaping into the air, demonstrating how energy could be transmitted without wires. Crowds marveled, journalists raved, and Tesla's reputation soared. Yet the dream was fragile. Investors, excited by profits from AC, were wary of Tesla's wilder visions. The public adored his spectacles, but struggled to grasp his theories. And Edison, though defeated in the current war, remained a formidable rival. The cost of triumph. Success brought Tesla fame but not wealth. Though Westinghouse honored his patents, financial strains led to renegotiations. In an act of generosity, or folly, Tesla tore up his contract, relinquishing royalties that could have made him one of the richest men alive. He did so, he said, to save Westinghouse's company and ensure the spread of AC. It was a noble sacrifice, but one that would haunt him. For while others grew rich from his genius, Tesla remained perpetually on the edge of poverty, dependent on fickle patrons and limited funds. Still, he pressed forward. He built laboratories, filled them with coils and transformers, and pursued the dream of wireless energy. He became a celebrity inventor, a symbol of modernity, a wizard who could summon lightning indoors. Newspapers published his every word. Artists painted him as a figure of almost mystical power. Yet behind the admiration lurked doubt. Was Tesla a prophet of the future, or a dreamer out of step with reality? Reflection. Picture him now, standing tall in his laboratory, his hand raised as arcs of violet electricity leap around him. The air crackles, the smell of ozone sharpens, and the crowd gasps. Tesla smiles faintly, not for the spectacle, but for the principle. To him, these sparks are not tricks. They are proof. Proof that the ether is there, alive, ready. The war of currents had been won. The world had embraced alternating current. But for Tesla, this was only a foothold. Ahead lay the real battle. To convince humanity that the universe itself was a reservoir of energy, waiting to be tapped. Ahead lay the towers, the failures, the betrayals, and the lonely end of a man who reached too far. And yet, in this moment, standing in the light of victory, Tesla allowed himself hope. He chose the high plateau for its air, the way it thinned into clarity the higher you climbed, the way storms gathered suddenly and then scattered like flocks. Colorado Springs, 1899. A town small enough to hear your own footfall at night, large enough to run a power station that could feed a new kind of appetite. The horizon pressed wide and naked, uncluttered by chimneys or the barges of the Hudson, and the sky felt near enough to touch. It suited him. There is a quiet that pioneers recognize, a threshold silence, Tesla stepped into it and felt his thoughts ring like struck crystal. He rented a plot just outside town and built a laboratory with the practical grace of a barn and the eccentric flair of a ship's hold. It was a long, low structure of wood and tarred paper, simple from a distance, but inside, ordered with feverish care. Coils, condensers, switches, racks of lamps and spheres, cabinets of mica and wire, a floor hatch that opened to a ground connection sunk deep into the soil, a roof slit that ran the length of the building like a sky wound, designed to be opened so lightning could taste the air within. From the center rose the mast, an upright timber capped with a polished copper sphere that caught starlight and gave it back as if in conversation. He hired a small crew, steadfast men with careful hands, who learned to read his moods, the way sailors read the grey of distant seas. He was calm most days, soft-spoken and exacting, but behind the stillness ran a voltage you could feel. When he sketched, they said, his eyes tracked the page like a bird of prey. When he calculated, the room fell away. He would sit perfectly still, then stand with a suddenness that rattled the glassware and say, simply, "Now." The town took him in with a wary affection. He dined at the Alta Vista Hotel, gliding through its lobby in dark, immaculate suits that made him look like a slice of midnight. He ate little, drank only milk, and tipped well. Children stared. Ladies lowered their voices when he passed and spoke of lightning tamed like a pet on his leash. The power company agreed to supply his peculiar demands so long as he paid promptly, and he did, each month, exact to the cent. One afternoon he invited the power plant men to the edge of the prairie to watch a single incandescent lamp laid on the ground blaze into life with no wire attached. The men cheered and then crossed themselves, half joking, half not. At night, the wind hurled itself against the world. The lab breathed and creaked. He would stand in the doorway, look toward Pike's Peak, and feel the ache that always accompanied beginnings, the sense that he was both late for something and standing precisely where he must. He had come for resonance. The word was simple enough, but to Tesla, it was a key that opened many doors. Everything has a natural frequency. Bridges and chalices, sand dunes, and the bones of a hand, organs of a cathedral, and the earth herself. Bring the right rhythm into contact with the right body, and it wakes. A small push at the right tempo can topple stone. A whisper at the right pitch can shatter crystal. He believed the earth could be made to sing, not metaphorically, not as a poet speaks, but physically, as a bell sings when struck. The ether, to him, was the medium in which that song would travel. He built the magnifying transmitter in Colorado Springs as a kind of orchestra conductor, a monstrous coil system that did not merely generate voltage, but multiplied it, that did not merely oscillate, but locked to the Earth's own deep tempo. The apparatus seemed to grow from the floor, a great primary coil like a copper wreath, a secondary as tall as a man if the man were a giant, an extra coil that rose like a column, crowned with a terminal smooth as a planet's cheek. He tuned the coils to one another until their dialogue became fluent, then tuned the whole to the ground with its buried plates, and finally to the sky through the mast and sphere. The first time he pulsed the system low and cautious, the air near the terminal grew soft. Not warmer, softer, as if some density in it had slipped loose. Tiny streamers hissed and crept along the wood like threads of frost in reverse. He threw the knife switch off and listened. The room retained a memory of the sound, a faint tinnitus of silence. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear the earth counting to itself in long numbers. He kept notes with the precision of a jurist and the intensity of a lover's letter. The pages are heady to read, voltages and coil diameters set beside phrases that belonged more to hymns than to notebooks, strange breathing of the air, sensation of fullness in the ground, standing luminous forms on wire points like grasses in wind. He was not superstitious, not in the usual ways, but he could not help describing phenomena as if they were alive. He had always been that way. To him, nature was not a dumb engine. It was articulate. The storms began properly in June. Afternoon heat dragged moisture up from the land. The sky bruised itself, and the lightning came, quick-fingered at first, then Leviathan-long, stitched from horizon to horizon. Tesla threw the roof slit open and rolled the terminal into the Isle of Skye. He waited for the storm to step into phase with his circuit. When it did, the lab's air took on the charged perfume of ozone, as if someone had freshly sharpened the world. He was not stealing the storm's energy. That was never the point. He was listening to its grammar and answering in kind. He triggered his transmitter at intervals calculated to return to the lab in exact cadence with the Earth's slow reflex. The effect, if it could be properly achieved, would be the formation of stationary waves through the Earth's crust, antinodes and nodes of electrical potential, like the bright and dark bands seen in water when ripples meet themselves. If such waves could be made strong and predictable, he believed, energy could be drawn from them anywhere on the surface, cleanly, efficiently, wirelessly. Not a rumor of magic, a mechanism. On the third night of the long storm, he let himself be bold. He raised the input. The room filled with blue fire. St. Elmo's tongues crawled like script across the ceiling. His men fell back to the door, eyes wide, mouths open, grinning and terrified like boys at a comet. The mast outside exhaled a corona that made the copper sphere look haloed. Arcs leapt from the terminal to any point offered them. A dangling chain, a screwdriver, the iron nails that held the world together. He felt the hairs on his arm rise as if listening. He laughed, quietly, a single breath, then cut the power. The dark felt tender. He took walks after midnight to let his mind cool. The prairie opened in black sheets, stitched here and there with house lanterns, like embers somebody had rolled too far from the fire. He spoke sometimes to his dead brother, to his mother, to invisible interlocutors that were not ghosts in any ordinary sense, but the assemblies of his thought. He named a set of distant cottonwoods the audience, and when his experiments excited him, he went to them and explained. The trees wore his confessions without comment. He slept very little and dreamed standing up, an old habit he had sharpened rather than lost, the ability to design with his eyes closed. He walked in his mind through arrangements of glass and copper, corrected clearances, changed turn counts, moved a whole 3 finger breadths left. When he was satisfied, he fabricated in waking life what he had already built in the theatre behind his brow. One morning he arrived late and asked a hand to cut 27 inches from a secondary coil they had not yet wound. The man stared. Tesla smiled without apology. By July he was lighting lamps at distances that made visitors forget to blink. He would drive a metal stake into the ground half a mile away and mount a bulb upon it. The filament glowed to a lemon white without wires, without a hum. He tried it with groups of bulbs set in a circle like pilgrims at a modest shrine. They blazed together and made the dust around their bases glitter, as if the ground itself were limned by invisible frost. He walked the circumference slowly, hands behind his back, a priest in a secular chapel. The assistants hollered and clapped in spite of themselves. He allowed it. Word spread, as it always does, more quickly than the truth. Some said he had lit the prairie itself, and the buffalo had wandered in to warm their hides in the light. Some said he could command the lightning to stand still in his palm like a tamed animal. The more fanciful suggested he was trying to speak to Mars. He did not correct them. He neither believed nor disbelieved that intelligence might answer. He merely held that the cosmos was alive with signals, and we had not yet learned to listen properly. The power company grew nervous. Their meters ticked like hot crickets every time his transmitter sang, and the dynamos down in the plant felt the pull of his experiments. like tides feel the moon. There is a point at which the men who run machines stop joking, a line far out past the familiar rails, but not yet in superstition, a point called risk. Tesla stood there and asked politely for a little more current. The superintendent stiffened his posture, smiled in that particular way practical men do when they intend to say no in a civilized tone, and then looked into Tesla's face and said, "Yes." It is not always logic that wins a concession. Sometimes it is a kind of contagious conviction. The blackout came in August, on a night so clear that the stars felt close as moths. He had been stepping the apparatus through a sequence he had spent days calculating. Small rises, holds, listens, another rise, another hold. The terminals had long tongues by then, violet white, so bright the wood beneath them cast shadows. You could hear them as a wet hiss that shifted to a bald roar. The copper sphere atop the mast wore a crown, and the crown grew a tail that leaned toward the south with the wind. The smell was rainless rain. He raised it one more increment. The assistants later argued about whether he said now, or whether he simply nodded. It did not matter. Something, somewhere, complained. A filament in the plant, a bearing, a coil. The exact part is irrelevant, because failure obeys a language all its own. The lab's lights, which had been an afterthought against the radiance of the terminal, collapsed to nothing in a single gulp. The transmitter continued a half-breath longer, an afterimage in sound, and then died as if a fist had closed around its throat. For a second, there was a silence so complete it hit like a blow, and then another sound rose. Distant shouting, confused, too far to understand, the kind of human noise you hear when a machine that never sleeps quits without warning. Tesla stood still. His men looked at him as if he were a captain on a ship that had struck something under the water. He exhaled. "Gentlemen," he said, "we will apologize." He went to the plant in person, hat in hand, and owned the damage without qualification. He paid for what had burnt. He complimented the men on keeping their tempers and their discipline. He never made excuses. A few days later, with repairs complete and new assurances codified into the paper between them, the current flowed again into his laboratory, as if nothing had happened. It is not that people forget. It is that they agree to remember alongside the other necessities of life. Privately, he wrote, "Exceeded a critical point beyond the capacity of the local works. Longitudinal component evident before interruption." He did not think in terms of mishap, but of thresholds. What most men called failure, he called a glimpse of a line he had not yet learned to cross with grace. He pursued stationary waves with the fervor of a man who believes he has found the correct lens for a blurred world. To a skeptic, his claims sounded merely large. To him, they were the most modest descriptions he could craft for phenomena that resisted language. "Imagine," he would say, "an earth trembling electrically, not in the convulsions of storm, but in ordered modes, circumferential rings of potential with quiet nodes between. Imagine being able to plant a modest apparatus in the ground at one of the bright rings and draw from the pattern as a mill draws from a river. You would be using no fuel. You would be borrowing coherence. Your only work would be to keep time with the planet." He tuned. He drained his transmitter and filled it again. He tested gaps and distances, changed the curvature of terminals, varied the heights and depths of his connections. He learned the personalities of every piece of equipment the way a violinist knows the temper of each string. He wrote of a strange darkening that occurred along a length of wire when the apparatus spoke sweetly with the ground, a reduction in glow, counterintuitive and telling, like a hush in a crowd before a revelation. He wrote of brush discharges that took the shapes of geometries too regular to be accident. On certain nights, he stood outside the lab and saw the corona atop the mast, reach upward, as if drawn by threads he could not see. The sky in that place is not shy about its electricity. Sprites and jets sketch their pedagogies in red and blue above the storms. He felt himself as a participant, not an observer. It was not tame, it was not safe, but it was intimate. The line between intimacy and danger is thin in any great undertaking. He was not alone in the laboratory's darkness. Mice came and went. A small owl took to roosting on the ridgepole above the slit in the roof. A fox once put its paws on the threshold and considered the strange weather within, then shook itself and vanished with a dignity he envied. His assistants settled into the rhythms of the place. They learned to move quietly around the coils, to keep one hand only near metal, to watch Tesla's posture as closely as they watched the meters. There is a choreography that grows among people who do dangerous work together. They practiced it until it felt like prayer. And then there were the signals. He had built a receiver of unusual delicacy, a device that could attend to faint whispers on frequencies other operators ignored. Out on the prairie, the nights are as thin as vellum. Sounds carry. He listened to named things. Spherics from distant storms, the clicks and pocks of nearby lightning, the steady grumble of the plant, an occasional telegraph signature. He listened to unnamed things as well. Narrow-band tremolos that slid up and down like someone running a wet finger around the rim of a glass. Periodic pulses of a precision that felt intentional. Silences so sudden they sounded like a word held on the tongue and not yet spoken. He noted times, counted intervals, tested whether the pulses tracked sidereal or solar clocks. He was careful. He knew how easily longing can masquerade as verification. He did not announce Martians. He did not kneel before the seductive idea that the universe had singled him out, but he allowed himself the permission any scientist deserves to wonder. He wrote that certain signals had a number and orderliness that made him think of intelligence. He resolved not to conclude, only to keep listening with better ears. The town's newspapers made what newspapers make of such things. Headlines that curled the truth into tighter shapes, and then lacquered it in amazement. People brought telescopes to the edge of his property to look for emissaries. He bowed to them from a distance, untroubled. He understood that wonder is not a vice, and that a little awe does less damage than a lot of cynicism. By autumn the air crisped, the grasses silvered at dawn. He could feel winter like a distant engine. He began to think of New York again, not because he was finished. He knew better than anyone how far he remained from an apparatus a banker could love, but because the time had come to take what he had learned and transmute it into architecture. The magnifying transmitter in Colorado Springs was a proof. The next would be a promise. Wardenclyffe did not yet have a name. It had a hunger shaped like a tower. He sketched forms that looked less like chimneys and more like meditations. A great wooden stem bolted into the ground like a drum, crowned by a sphere big enough to feel like a moon if you stood too near. Beneath it, an inverted architecture. Shafts and rooms bored into the earth. Plates sunk into soil wet with its own patience. The whole tuned like a cello to the planet's fundamental. You cannot build such a thing without money, halfway between a fortune and a crime. He would need to charm one of the men who believed the future was an object that could be purchased. He did not worry about that at night. He thought only of the arithmetic and the music. If the earth could be made to carry his waves in standing glory, what else might follow? Navigation signals that slipped around the globe like moonlight, messages that cared nothing for wires, time standards that set the hearts of clocks beating together in cities 1,000 miles apart, power that rose from the ground like a spring, drawn into homes and workshops without the tyranny of lines. He imagined a village on a hill in a poor country. No rails, no lines, no coal yards, glowing at sundown because the ground itself sang. It sounds like mercy when heard that way. Perhaps it was. He locked up the laboratory one evening and walked farther than usual, past the reach of the town's lamps, until the road sloped, and he could see the settlement, like a constellation spilled on the land. The altitudes make people quiet in their bones. He stood a long time, not thinking of fame's comb, or the black dogs that would one day walk close at his heels, not thinking of Morgan, or of letters framed to please men who liked numbers but disliked doubt. He thought of his mother winding thread at a window in a house that smelled of damp wood and bread. He thought of his brother riding bareback in a field the color of old coins. He thought of the first time he had felt a machine live in his hands and become more than a tool, become a voice. When he returned, the lab waited in the dark, docile as a ship in a harbor. He unlocked the door and set a lamp low. He ran his hand along the rim of the primary coil. He had an urge, to immodesty, to confession, to prayer. He did not name it. He simply said aloud, to no one, "It can be done." The room did not answer, but the silence felt like agreement. In the last weeks of the year, he gathered his notes into an order that would make sense to another mind. This is always the hardest labor for a certain kind of genius, to bind the vision to the page without letting its color drain away. He wrote the observed and the inferred. He distinguished the likely from the hoped for. He marked the entries that contained errors that would be useful later, the wrong turns that proved how the map must look. He drew his coils with draftsman care and added small notations with the tenderness of a margin in a favorite book. He sent gifts to his assistants' children, a habit that surprised men who took his severity for coldness. He paid his accounts. He visited the power plant, and with genuine feeling, thanked the superintendent for keeping the current honest. He walked once more to his trees and told them, with a careful brevity that would have impressed even a skeptic, what he had done. He boarded the train without ceremony, as if he were merely running an errand that happened to be 3 states long. He watched the mountains fall back and become a memory as clean as a bone. The laboratory stood empty through winter, snow piled against its western wall. Coyotes passed, leaving statements in cursive. The copper sphere atop the mast wore the light as easily as it had worn flame. It did not care which. In spring, the building would be dismantled. The lumber would find its way into sheds, fences, a porch. The mast would be cut and carted, the sphere boxed and later polished by hands that would never know the taste of its corona. The ground plates would stay, surrendered to the soil's immense forgetfulness, a set of mild artifacts for some future archaeologist of electricity to discover and misinterpret with eloquent certainty. But while it stood, it had been a place where the idea of the earth as an instrument moved from the heresy of poetry toward the discipline of engineering. It had been a place where the ether ceased to be simply a rumor and became a working assumption, a medium with which one could converse if one learned the manners of it. He returned east with that certainty in his pocket, like a coin he would not spend. He was not naive. Hope never blinded him to the price. He knew how men haggle when numbers grow large. He knew how swiftly admiration sours when a miracle cannot be patented into a monthly dividend. He knew that ridicule walks faster than gratitude. But he had watched lamps bloom from bare ground. He had seen the air itself gather into light along the rim of metal. He had tasted the particular quiet that falls when a machine and a world find each other's frequency. So, he allowed himself, for once, to imagine a city whose nights were gentle. He pictured old women holding their needlework by steady radiance, boys reading in doorways without smoke in their lungs, the mills turning at dawn with no coal-stained men cursing at jammed belts, hospitals aglow in storms when wires elsewhere fell, ships at sea that knew their way without any star. farms with pumps that pulled sweet water free of hard winter. He permitted himself, in short, to be guilty of mercy's engineering. It is easy now, in a century that turned its back on his ether and wrote different equations into the walls, to treat this as quaintness. It is not quaint to wish for less drudgery. It is not childish to want the common dark gentled by cleverness. It is not madness to insist that the universe may be more generous than our factories have taught us to believe. He closed his eyes and felt, as surely as he had felt the prairie wind, that the next tower would be taller than doubt. The east end of Long Island, 1901. Salt air rolled in from the Atlantic, carrying gull cries and the slow thunder of waves breaking on the shore. The land was flat, the soil sandy, the horizon wide and pale with morning mist. Here, on a patch of ground purchased with borrowed money and borrowed faith, Nikola Tesla prepared to build the machine that would, he believed, change the destiny of mankind. Wardenclyffe. The very name would become both anthem and elegy in the story of his life. It was to be the culmination of everything he had learned in the Balkans, in Graz, in New York, in Colorado Springs. A tower not for observation but for participation, a spire meant to converse with the earth and sky, to draw power from the unseen medium and distribute it freely across the globe. It was, to Tesla, less a structure than a promise. The design rose first in his mind, as all his creations did. A great wooden shaft, 70 feet high, anchored by timbers driven deep. From its crown, a steel framework ballooned outward, an immense hemisphere of interlaced beams, capped with a copper dome that would gleam like a small sun. Beneath the ground, shafts tunneled downward into darkness, chambered with iron and copper plates sunk into moist earth, designed to clutch the planet itself and make it an organ in his orchestra. Tesla walked the site alone before the work began, his coat buttoned against the wind, his shoes crunching on frost. He pressed his palm to the soil and whispered, as if to reassure the earth, "I will not wound you. I will only ask you to sing. The patron of ambition." No genius builds without patrons, and Tesla's was J.P. Morgan, the titan of finance, a man who shaped markets with a glance and bent nations with a telegram. Morgan saw in Tesla not mysticism, but opportunity. Wireless telegraphy was in its infancy, and Marconi's name was gaining headlines. Tesla promised Morgan not only wireless messages, but wireless power, a system that would eclipse cables and wires, a network that could wrap the globe. Morgan advanced $150,000, an immense sum then, enough to buy the land and begin construction. In return, he demanded control over the patents and a share of future profits. Tesla agreed, though deep in his heart, he felt the word profit misshaped the destiny of what he envisioned. To Tesla, the tower was a gift to mankind. To Morgan, it was an investment. Their understandings were parallel lines that would, inevitably, diverge, raising the tower. Construction began in 1901. Crews arrived with wagons of lumber, steel, and brick. The sound of hammers echoed across the empty shore. Farmers passing with their carts stared at the rising skeleton and asked each other what new lighthouse this was, or what strange factory. The workers spoke of their employer with curiosity, a tall man who visited the site often, dressed not like a foreman, but like a diplomat, speaking softly, his instructions precise. He treated them with courtesy unusual for a man of wealth, and they respected him in return. Slowly the tower rose. The wooden shaft climbed into the sky, scaffolded with ladders. The steel hemisphere spread like a great crown, rib by rib, until it loomed against the clouds. Beneath, the foundations deepened, men digging shafts and laying plates as Tesla directed. He insisted on exact depths, precise alignments. To him, the underground portion was as vital as the visible tower. for resonance could not be achieved with the sky alone. The earth must answer as well. By summer, the form was unmistakable. A giant mushroom of timber and steel, capped by copper that shone in the sun. Locals gave it nicknames: the Tesla Tower, the Mystery Mast. Children came on bicycles to watch. Newspapers sent photographers who captured images of the strange colossus rising from the sands, the dream at its zenith. Tesla moved into a modest building on the grounds, both laboratory and residence. Here he worked late into the night, filling pages with calculations, adjusting coil designs, sending telegrams to suppliers. The laboratory hummed with transformers, condensers, and coils that spat arcs of lightning across the room. Lamps glowed without wires, instruments ticked, and Tesla, pacing like a conductor, whispered to himself as he tested the harmonies of resonance. Wardenclyffe was to be more than an experiment. It was to be the prototype of a global network. Tesla envisioned dozens of such towers, spaced around the planet, transmitting not only messages but power. Ships at sea would draw energy as easily as water. Villages in deserts and mountains would glow with electric light without wires or coal. The ether, he insisted, was full of energy. One needed only to learn how to resonate with it. He spoke of it with the conviction of a prophet. When wireless is perfectly applied, the whole Earth will be converted into a huge brain, capable of response in every one of its parts. A man will be able to carry an instrument in his vest pocket and listen to music, or the speech of a political leader, or the words of a distinguished divine, conveyed from any distance. To those who listened, he described not only the future of power, but the future of communication. The radio, the smartphone, the internet, all hinted at in the vocabulary of resonance and ether. Shadows at the edge. Yet even as the tower climbed, shadows lengthened. Marconi sent his first wireless signals across the Atlantic, capturing the imagination of the world. His system was crude compared to Tesla's vision, but it was simple, cheap, and working. Investors flocked to Marconi. Newspapers declared him the pioneer of wireless. Tesla fumed quietly, certain that Marconi was using principles he himself had published years before. Meanwhile, costs at Wardenclyffe mounted. The tower consumed money like a furnace. Lumber, steel, copper, labor, all devoured the funds Morgan had supplied. Tesla sent letters requesting more. At first Morgan obliged, but as the bills grew, and Tesla's promises remained grand but unfulfilled, the banker grew cold. "It is not a charitable institution I am running," Morgan reminded him. Tesla's dream and Morgan's patience were on a collision course. The tower stands. By 1903, Wardenclyffe stood completed, 187 feet of timber and steel, crowned with a copper dome 90 feet across. Beneath the ground, shafts plunged 120 feet deep, lined with iron and copper, sunk into the damp earth. It was a machine both above and below, sky and soil joined in one architecture. At night, Tesla stood at the base and gazed upward, imagining the currents that would soon leap from its crown. He believed he was on the verge of demonstrating to the world that power could be transmitted without wires, that the ether could be harnessed. He dreamed of calling journalists, scientists, and financiers to witness the birth of a new era. But the demonstration never came. The fall of the tower. Morgan refused further funding. The financial world was turning elsewhere, and Tesla's reputation, once so brilliant, was beginning to tarnish. Rumors spread that the tower was a folly, a waste. Newspapers mocked. Some claimed it was an attempt to contact Martians. Others declared it dangerous, a menace to ships and telegraphs. Tesla worked on in silence, but without funds, progress slowed, then stopped. By 1905, Wardenclyffe stood idle, a giant husk, its promise unfulfilled. The copper dome dulled, the timber weathered, The iron rusted. Workers left. Tesla walked the grounds alone, listening to the wind whistle through the beams like a requiem. Years later, the tower would be dismantled for scrap, its dream dissolved into rust and memory. But in these first years, it stood as a monument to ambition, untempered by compromise, a vision too vast for the age that birthed it. Reflection. Stand with him there, on the shore, beneath the tower. The gulls wheel overhead, the surf murmurs, the copper dome gleams faintly in the evening sun. Tesla tilts his head upward and sees not failure, but possibility. He sees towers multiplying across continents, the earth humming like a great harp, humanity lifted into a new era by the song of the ether. Others see a ruin in the making. He sees a promise. And perhaps that is the essence of genius, to stand before a half-built dream and already see the world transformed. The year was 1905, and the world was moving on without him. Wardenclyffe stood silent on the Long Island shore, its copper dome tarnishing, its wooden bones creaking against the salt wind. For Tesla, the tower was not just an experiment, it was his covenant with the future. But the financiers had withdrawn, the workers had left, and the tide of industry was flowing towards simpler, more profitable inventions. Inside the modest laboratory at the base of the tower, Tesla walked alone among dust-coated instruments. The great coils that had once sung with energy were mute. The tables cluttered with sketches and notebooks felt less like an inventor's bench and more like an altar to a faith the world no longer shared. He lit the lamps with deliberate slowness, sat at his desk, and wrote as though every line might be his last chance to convince posterity. He was still a tall, elegant figure, but his face bore the shadows of strain. His moustache, once dark, had thinned. His eyes, still intense, now carried the weight of betrayals and disappointments. Yet when he wrote, his words still burned with conviction. The earth is a conductor of electrical vibrations. By proper attunement, it can be made to resonate as a whole. The loss of Morgan. J.P. Morgan had once been Tesla's shield, his source of funds, his validation before the world of industry. But Morgan was not a man of sentiment. His investments had to yield returns, and Marconi's triumph across the Atlantic had made Tesla's elaborate promises seem extravagant. Morgan withdrew his hand, and with it, Tesla's dream began to unravel. Tesla begged, pleaded, argued. He sent letters thick with eloquence, painting visions of a future without poverty, without darkness. Power can be made available in unlimited amounts, anywhere on the globe, he wrote. But the banker remained unmoved. The financiers wanted telegraphs that worked today, not towers that might transform tomorrow. It was here that Tesla first felt the full sting of abandonment. The newspapers, once eager to laud him as a wizard, began to whisper of impracticality, of obsession. Rivals smirked, friends kept their distance. Tesla pressed on, but each step forward felt as though he walked against a gale of doubt. Isolation. In the years that followed, Tesla retreated into himself. He continued to give lectures, to dazzle with demonstrations of wireless lamps and roaring coils, but the scale of his projects diminished. The great tower loomed unfinished, a monument to what might have been. He began to spend more time alone, walking the streets of New York at night. He fed pigeons in Bryant Park, watching them wheel in the lamplight. Their soft coos and sudden flights gave him a solace human company could not. He claimed to know them each by sight, to understand their personalities. To one particular white pigeon, he attached a devotion so intense that he would later admit, "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman." Friends worried, admirers whispered. But Tesla, as always, saw in the ordinary something transcendent. The pigeons were, to him, proof of harmony, of life attuned to unseen currents, a reputation in flux. Even as his fortunes declined, Tesla's reputation flickered unpredictably between ridicule and reverence. Newspapers alternated between portraying him as a failed dreamer and as a prophet of marvels yet to come. He fed the contradiction with bold statements. In interviews he spoke of death rays, of machines to end war, of contact with other planets. Some called him delusional. Others called him ahead of his time. Both, perhaps, were true. The scientific establishment, meanwhile, was shifting. Einstein's theory of relativity was dismantling the old conception of ether, declaring it unnecessary. Space, Einstein argued, was not filled with a medium, but shaped by the geometry of space-time itself. To many, this was the final nail in the coffin of Tesla's great conviction. But Tesla refused to yield. He insisted the ether was real, that relativity was an error, that future generations would vindicate him. He was becoming a man out of step with his century. The hotel rooms. Tesla never owned a home. He lived in hotels, first the Waldorf Astoria, later the Saint, Regis, the New Yorker, and others. His suites became temporary laboratories, cluttered with coils, instruments, and, increasingly, pigeons. He was meticulous about his surroundings. He demanded crisp linens, exact meals, polished shoes. He avoided pearls, disliked round objects, and insisted on the number 3 in all things. 3 napkins, 3 steps, 3 attempts. The staff indulged him. They knew him as eccentric but harmless, a gentleman whose bills were often paid late, but whose manners never slipped. To younger employees, he was a legend walking in their midst, the man who had defeated Edison, the wizard who had lit the World's Fair. To older ones, he was a relic, fading, eccentric, yet impossible to ignore. The invention that might have been. Even as his fortunes declined, Tesla continued to announce inventions that promised to reshape the world. He spoke of a bladeless turbine, simple and elegant, which could revolutionize industry. He filed patents for wireless transmitters, for devices to harness cosmic rays, for improvements in aviation. But few of these reached production. Investors, once burned, were reluctant to return. Companies chose safer, incremental advances. Tesla's ideas, often brilliant, languished in notebooks and interviews. Yet always, beneath it all, was the same conviction: the ether. He could not let it go. It was the axis around which his life turned. Without it, the world was emptier, flatter, robbed of mystery. With it, the universe sang, and he believed he could teach humanity to sing with it. Reflection. Imagine him now, alone in his hotel room, the curtains drawn against the city's glare. On the table lie papers scattered like fallen leaves, sketches of turbines, towers, coils. Beside them, a dish of seed for pigeons, waiting for his evening walk. He sits in a high-backed chair, his hands folded, his eyes fixed not on the walls, but on a horizon only he can see. The world thinks him defeated. He thinks himself unfinished. The tower may have failed, the money may be gone, but the vision endures. He still hears the hum of resonance beneath the silence of the night. He still believes that one day, someone will strike the earth like a bell, and the song of the ether will resound. The first decade of the new century ended, with the world rushing into modernity. Cars rattling across cobblestones, airplanes rising uncertainly into the air, telegraphs and telephones binding continents. Industry was the new religion, and men like Ford, Marconi, and Rockefeller its priests. Yet amid this triumph of machinery and commerce, Nikola Tesla, once hailed as a magician of progress, found himself drifting to the margins. It was not that his mind had dimmed. If anything, his imagination was sharper than ever. But the scale of his visions, the audacity of his claims, and his refusal to compromise placed him outside the circles of profit and politics. He became both celebrated and mocked, admired as a genius, and dismissed as a crank. The contradiction gnawed at him, yet he bore it with the same aloof grace that had always marked his life. A prophet without a congregation. Tesla still gave lectures, and when he spoke, audiences were entranced. His voice was low and deliberate, his accent lending a musical cadence to his words. He described wireless energy, death rays, interplanetary communication, and machines that could end hunger. Newspapers eagerly printed his pronouncements, turning them into headlines that oscillated between reverence and ridicule. Yet outside the lecture halls, the world was moving towards simpler, more practical devices. Marconi's radios, clumsy though they were, worked. Edison's companies thrived on steady profits. The financiers who once flirted with Tesla's grand designs had turned their attention elsewhere. Tesla was left with ideas too vast for his era, too costly for cautious investors, too strange for men who measured success in quarterly returns. In a sense, he had become a prophet without a congregation, respected in name, but isolated in practice. The white pigeon. It was during these years that Tesla's relationship with pigeons deepened into something extraordinary, even unsettling to outsiders. Each day he walked to Bryant Park or Madison Square, scattering seed from a paper bag. The birds came to him in flocks, fluttering and cooing, alighting on his arms and shoulders. Children stopped to watch, and passers-by whispered. To Tesla, the pigeons were not vermin, but companions. One white pigeon in particular captured his heart. She followed him, visited him in his hotel room, and seemed to him a symbol of purity and devotion. "I loved that pigeon as a man loves a woman," he confessed later. "As long as I had her, there was purpose in my life." When she grew ill, Tesla spent what little money he had on medicines and contraptions to nurse her. And when at last she died, he said he felt a light leave his life, as though the last true bond of love had been severed. To outsiders, it seemed eccentric, even mad. But to Tesla, the pigeons were a solace against the loneliness of genius, the stubbornness of belief. The scientific community had largely abandoned the ether. Einstein's relativity was ascendant, and with it came the declaration that the old medium of space was unnecessary. Space was not filled with substance, but curved by gravity, shaped by mass. Tesla would not accept it. He denounced relativity as a magnificent mathematical garb that obscured truth. He clung to his conviction that the universe was suffused with a medium, an ocean of energy from which all forces derived. To him, the ether was not a discarded hypothesis, but an undeniable fact of experience. He had felt it in Colorado Springs, seen it in his coils, glimpsed it in the flicker of wireless lamps. He could not betray what his senses and intuition had shown him. And so he stood apart, refusing to bend. To many, this made him an anachronism, a man stranded in a discarded paradigm. But to Tesla, it made him faithful to reality itself. The death ray and the dream of peace. If the world would not fund his wireless power, perhaps it would listen to his machines of defense. Tesla began to speak of a new invention, a particle beam weapon, which the press quickly christened the death ray. With it, he claimed, nations could render themselves invulnerable to attack. A wall of invisible energy could protect borders, ending the need for armies. It was a strange paradox, a weapon designed not to wage war but to abolish it. Tesla believed that by making attack impossible, peace could be secured. He sought funding from governments, wrote letters to ministries, and described his invention with careful vagueness, enough to inspire interest, but not enough to give away his secrets. Yet no government adopted it. The world was preparing for another war, and the appetite was for practical arms not visionary shields. The death ray remained another of Tesla's unbuilt promises, an echo of his dream of harnessing the ether for humanity's salvation. Hotel corridors and empty pockets. Tesla's life became a succession of hotel rooms. He lived at the Waldorf Astoria, then the Saint, Regis, then the New Yorker. Each time unpaid bills mounted, and he was forced to move. He lived on credit extended by admirers, on small grants, on the goodwill of friends. Yet he maintained his rituals with the dignity of a fallen aristocrat. His suits were pressed, his shoes polished, his manners impeccable. He dined on milk, bread, and honey, avoiding heavier foods. He demanded fresh linens, spotless floors, precise service. The hotel staff, though bemused, came to respect him. He was eccentric, but he was unfailingly courteous, and there was an aura about him that no ridicule could erase. Still, behind the formality lay poverty. Tesla, once courted by financiers and feted by society, now lived on the edge of destitution. His inventions had changed the world, yet he profited little from them. The royalties he had torn up for Westinghouse, the patents that had lapsed, the ideas stolen by others, all left him with nothing but notebooks and dreams. The wizard in twilight. The public continued to see him as a wizard, a conjurer of lightning, a man who spoke of marvels yet to come. Newspapers printed interviews filled with predictions, wireless energy, remote-controlled machines, weather control, interplanetary communication. Some of his forecasts proved startlingly accurate. Others seemed fantastical. But behind the wizardly image was a man growing old, increasingly frail, haunted by loneliness. He walked the city streets with measured steps, his pockets filled with seed for pigeons. He still lectured, still wrote, still dreamed. But the great laboratories were gone, the towers dismantled, the funds exhausted. He was a visionary without means, a prophet without disciples. And yet, even in his twilight, there was a strange majesty in him. He had never compromised, never surrendered his belief in the ether, never abandoned his conviction that humanity could rise to a higher destiny through science, rightly applied. He was out of step with his century, but perhaps in step with a future still to come. Reflection. Picture him now, in the corridor of a grand hotel, his figure tall and gaunt, his suit immaculate, his eyes distant. The world bustles around him, chambermaids, bellhops, businessmen, but he walks as if in another realm, hearing not the clatter of dishes or the rustle of papers, but the deep, unceasing hum of the universe. He is at once both visionary and outcast, admired yet ignored, remembered yet forgotten, mocked yet revered. He is a man who gave humanity light, but was left in darkness, a man who dreamed of harmony while the world chose war, a man who clung to the ether when the world declared it dead. And still, even as the years pressed upon him, he carried within his heart the unshaken conviction that the universe was alive with energy, waiting for humanity to awaken. The guns of August roared, and the world fell into the furnace of war. It was 1914, and Europe convulsed in blood and fire. Tesla, by now a man in his late 50s, watched from afar. He was in New York, insulated from the front lines, but not from the tremors of history. The city itself pulsed with wartime energy, ships bristling in the harbor, factories hammering day and night, headlines screaming of battles and atrocities. Tesla's heart, though, was torn. He had been born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, raised in its provinces, nurtured by its culture. Yet he had come to America as a young man, had given his genius to this new land, and had found in its wide horizons the canvas for his dreams. Now his two worlds were at war. He remained neutral, as much out of necessity as inclination. He spoke rarely of politics, but when he did, he spoke of peace. His inventions, he insisted, were meant to uplift humanity, not destroy it. War and the ether. Tesla's contemporaries rushed to apply science to warfare. Chemists devised poison gases. Engineers built tanks. Aviators strapped machine guns to their fragile planes. Marconi's wireless telegraphy became an indispensable tool for armies and navies. Everywhere technology bent its back to the cause of destruction. But Tesla remained out of step. He continued to speak of the ether, of wireless power, of towers that could make war obsolete by giving every nation equal access to limitless energy. "It is not by force of arms that humanity will be redeemed," he told an interviewer, "but by harnessing the forces of nature for the benefit of all." His words, noble as they were, rang hollow in a world consumed by slaughter. Investors did not want to fund utopias. Governments wanted weapons, not wonders. Tesla's ether theory, already considered eccentric by many, drifted further from the mainstream. Attempts at relevance. Still, Tesla sought ways to contribute. He proposed to the US government a system of detecting enemy submarines using electrical resonance, a kind of proto-radar. He offered designs for remote-controlled torpedoes, drawing on his earlier experiments with radio-controlled boats. He spoke of wireless power that could drive fleets without coal. But these ideas, though ingenious, were too advanced, too untested, too grand. The Navy and War Department listened politely, then turned to simpler, proven methods. Tesla, once hailed as a genius, was increasingly treated as a visionary without practical application. His pride smarted, but he pressed on, convinced that history would vindicate him. The interwar years. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the world was changed. Empires collapsed, nations were redrawn, and the United States emerged as a global power. Tesla, however, emerged from the war years diminished. His Wardenclyffe Tower had been dismantled for scrap in 1917, its dream gone. His finances were in ruins. His name, though still respected, was overshadowed by younger inventors and more commercially successful enterprises. The 1920s brought him little relief. The decade roared with jazz, automobiles, radios, and skyscrapers. The world embraced modernity with a giddy abandon. But Tesla, now in his 60s, was increasingly a man of the past. He lived in hotels, often unable to pay his bills, relying on the kindness of friends and admirers. He continued to file patents, some brilliant, some impractical, but few found support. And always, he returned to the ether. Even as the scientific establishment embraced relativity and quantum mechanics, Tesla clung to his conviction. He denounced Einstein, rejected space-time, and insisted that the ether was the true medium of reality. "The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena," he declared, "it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence." His words found little echo among physicists, but among laypeople, mystics, and dreamers, they resonated. Tesla was becoming not just a scientist, but a legend, a figure who stood at the border between fact and myth. The solitude of a genius. Tesla's solitude deepened. He dined alone, walked alone, and spoke more often to pigeons than to people. Yet his mind remained aflame. He sketched devices to harness cosmic rays, to draw power from the sun, to transmit signals across planets. He spoke of machines that could prevent earthquakes or alter weather. Each announcement drew headlines, but few bore fruit. The press oscillated between awe and mockery. Some hailed him as the greatest genius alive, others dismissed him as a relic, a dreamer lost in fantasy. Tesla himself seemed unbothered. He had always cared more for truth than for reputation. Still, the loneliness weighed on him. In rare candid moments, He confessed to friends that he felt abandoned, misunderstood, betrayed by the very world he had tried to uplift. The white pigeon he loved became his last true companion, a symbol of purity in a world that had grown too loud, too cruel. Reflection. Picture him in the 1920s, an aging man, tall and gaunt, his suit immaculate but threadbare, his eyes still burning with intensity. He walks the streets of New York at dusk, scattering seed for pigeons, while the city roars around him with the noise of cars and radios. He is both part of the world and apart from it, a figure of mystery, carrying within him a vision that few can understand. The world is dancing to jazz and chasing profits, but Tesla is still listening to the deep hum of the universe, still convinced that the ether is real, still dreaming of a humanity redeemed by harmony with the forces of nature. It is a lonely vision, but it is his, and he will never let it go. The years moved on, and Tesla moved with them, though increasingly like a ghost walking through a city that no longer recognized him. By the 1930s, New York was a world apart from the one he had known in his prime. The Jazz Age gave way to depression, breadlines snaked around corners, Wall Street's glitter had tarnished, and the once proud optimism of the American century sagged beneath hunger and unemployment. Tesla, once the darling of financiers and the press, now lived in the shadows of the hotels that sheltered him. He had no laboratory, no staff, no tower. His experiments had been reduced to sketches on hotel stationery, and his companions were no longer engineers and patrons, but bellboys, waiters, and pigeons. Still, his mind burned on, incandescent with visions of an unseen world alive with energy. The hotel years. Tesla became a fixture of the hotel circuit, moving from the Waldorf Astoria to the Governor Clinton, and finally to the Hotel New Yorker. His rooms were modest, his possessions few. He lived largely on credit, often failing to pay his bills, and yet hotels indulged him out of respect for his name, or perhaps out of pity for the strange, courtly gentleman who spoke of cosmic rays and death beams. He was meticulous to the end. He demanded spotless linens, polished shoes, and precise service. He dressed immaculately in tailored suits, his hair slicked back, his mustache neatly trimmed. Even when penniless, he carried himself with the dignity of a man who had once lit the world's fairs and commanded financiers' attention. The staff humored his eccentricities. He refused to touch round objects. He insisted on multiples of 3. 3 napkins, 3 towels, 3 steps around the table before sitting. He dined mostly on warm milk, honey, and bread. He avoided women, claiming chastity preserved his mind. He walked daily to feed pigeons, carrying seeds in his pockets like a priest bearing communion. To the young bellhops and waitresses, he was a curiosity, a relic of another age. To older staff, he was a legend fading into obscurity. To himself, he remained what he had always been, a servant of the forces unseen, a man listening for the voice of the ether, the pigeon and the light. In these years, Tesla's relationship with pigeons became a defining part of his existence. Among the flock he fed in Bryant Park and on the hotel rooftops, there was one white pigeon he loved above all others. She visited his window daily, and he spent hours speaking to her, watching her preen, feeding her by hand. When she fell ill, he spared no effort to save her, building contraptions to cradle her, spending what little money he had on medicines. When she finally died, Tesla confessed that a light had left his life. He told friends he had seen a bright beam of light emanate from her eyes as her spirit departed. "As long as I had her," he said, "there was a purpose in my life." With her death, that purpose seemed to dim. To outsiders, his devotion to a bird seemed madness, but for Tesla, it was a symbol. The pigeon embodied purity, constancy, and love untainted by betrayal. In a life marked by broken promises and shattered dreams, she had been his last true companion. The ether against relativity. Even as his body weakened, Tesla's convictions never wavered. He denounced Einstein's relativity, insisting that the ether was real, that energy filled the cosmos, and that future generations would rediscover what modern science had cast aside. He wrote papers few read, gave interviews where he spoke boldly of new discoveries, and made pronouncements that alternately thrilled and puzzled the press. He spoke of harnessing cosmic rays, of transmitting power wirelessly, of machines that could end famine, of a death ray that could make war impossible. To some, these claims confirmed his genius. To others, they marked him as delusional. But Tesla cared little for their judgment. He had always lived ahead of his time, and if the world could not yet follow, so be it. He believed truth would endure, even if its prophet was forgotten. Recognition amid decline. Despite his poverty, Tesla did not vanish entirely from public view. Admirers still sought him out. Journalists still published interviews with the Wizard of Electricity. In 1931, Time magazine put him on its cover for his 75th birthday, honoring his contributions to the modern age. Banquets were held in his honor, and though he arrived frail and gaunt, his speeches still carried the elegance and fire of old. At these gatherings, he often returned to the same themes: the power of nature, the promise of wireless energy, the reality of the ether, the dream of a humanity lifted from drudgery by science. Audiences applauded politely, some with genuine admiration, others with the indulgence reserved for old men who once mattered. Tesla himself remained aloof. He accepted honors graciously but without vanity. He knew the world celebrated him as a relic, a curiosity, even as it ignored the dreams that had consumed his life. The quiet end. By the early 1940s, Tesla was a frail old man, thin as a reed, his clothes worn, his steps slow. He lived alone in room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker. He rarely left except to feed pigeons. He continued to write, filling notebooks with equations and musings, but few ever saw them. On January 7, 1943, Tesla died alone in his room, aged 86. For 2 days his body lay undiscovered, until a maid entered and found him slumped in bed, still dressed in his suit, the curtains drawn, the pigeons waiting outside. He left behind trunks of papers, boxes of inventions, and a legacy both immense and misunderstood. Government agents seized his belongings, searching for secrets. Conspiracy theories blossomed. Admirers wept. The world, in the midst of war, scarcely noticed. But in the decades to come, his name would rise again, burnished into legend. Reflection. Picture him one last time, walking slowly through the streets of New York, seed in his pocket, pigeons circling above. The city roars with cars, radios, and the fever of modern life. But he walks as if in another realm. His eyes are distant, seeing not skyscrapers but towers of wireless power, not crowds, but a humanity united by energy freely given, not pigeons, but messengers of harmony. He is old, frail, forgotten by many, but within him still burns the conviction that the universe is alive with resonance, that the ether is real, that truth will one day be revealed. He dies alone, but his vision does not die. And in that vision lies both the tragedy and the triumph of Nikola Tesla, a man who gave the world light and who spent his life chasing the deeper light that others could not see. The year of Tesla's death, 1943, was a world convulsed by war. While bombs fell over Europe and the Pacific burned with fleets and fire, a thin man in a New York hotel room slipped quietly from life. His passing made little ripple at first. The newspapers ran small obituaries, Colleagues offered polite tributes. To most, he was a forgotten genius, a relic of the Gilded Age, eccentric and brilliant but ultimately impractical. Yet even in death, Tesla's story was not finished. If anything, it was only beginning. The government's shadow. Almost immediately after his death, Tesla's belongings were seized by the Office of Alien Property. Agents descended on his room at the Hotel New Yorker, carrying away trunks filled with papers, notebooks, blueprints, and devices. The justification was precaution. America was at war, and Tesla's ideas, his death ray, his wireless transmissions, might contain secrets too dangerous to fall into enemy hands. For decades, rumors swirled. What did the government find in those trunks? Were there working prototypes of beam weapons? Did Tesla's theories hint at technologies beyond the grasp of his era? Official reports later claimed that nothing of military value was discovered, that his ideas were brilliant but impractical. But for those who loved mystery, the sudden secrecy only confirmed suspicions. Tesla, the prophet of the ether, had become a figure wrapped in shadow, forgotten yet not gone. In the years after his death, Tesla's name dimmed further. Edison was celebrated as the father of electricity. Marconi was hailed as the pioneer of radio. Westinghouse's companies thrived. Tesla's contributions, alternating current, radio, remote control, fluorescent lighting, were acknowledged in footnotes, but his personality, his vision, his obsession with the ether faded from the mainstream. Yet among a small circle of admirers, Tesla remained alive. Engineers who remembered his demonstrations, writers who recalled his eloquence, and mystics who saw in him a seer of hidden truths, all kept his name alive. Articles appeared in fringe magazines, biographies trickled out, and slowly the legend began to grow. The rise of the myth. By the 1960s and 70s, Tesla was no longer just an inventor. He was a symbol. The counterculture, suspicious of establishment science and hungry for visionary figures, embraced him. Books and pamphlets celebrated him as a prophet silenced by greedy corporations, a man who had discovered free energy but was suppressed by bankers. The truth was more complex. Tesla was not suppressed so much as neglected, not silenced so much as ignored. His visions were too vast, his finances too precarious, his timing too ill-fated. But the myth was powerful. In a world weary of war and industry, Tesla became the patron saint of dreamers, the man who promised a world of harmony with the cosmos. His ether theory, dismissed by mainstream physics, found new life in alternative circles. Believers in hidden energies, in cosmic forces, in suppressed technologies, all invoked his name. He became a bridge between science and mysticism, between the possible and the imagined. Reclamation by science. Even as myth-makers claimed him, science too began to reclaim him. Historians of technology pointed out how deeply modern life owed to him. The alternating current system that powered cities, the fluorescent lights that glowed in offices, the remote controls that guided machines, all bore his imprint. Radio historians acknowledge that Marconi had built on Tesla's patents, and courts even reversed earlier rulings, crediting Tesla as the true father of radio. Slowly, Tesla's reputation shifted. He was no longer just an eccentric. He was restored as a giant of invention. Schools began to teach his name alongside Edison and Bell. Biographies appeared that treated him with dignity and depth. By the late 20th century, Tesla was recognized as one of the greatest minds of his age. Yet his ether theory remained in limbo, dismissed by physicists, cherished by dreamers, the ether's strange afterlife. In mainstream science, the ether was dead, killed by Michelson and Morley's experiment, buried by Einstein's relativity. But in Tesla's legacy, the ether lived on. His insistence that the universe was filled with an unseen medium resonated with those dissatisfied with cold equations. And ironically, modern physics began to speak, in whispers, of concepts not unlike the ether. Quantum fields, dark energy, zero-point fluctuations. Space, once thought empty, proved to be full of strange forces. Some scientists even noted the irony. Perhaps Tesla, though wrong in detail, had been right in spirit. Perhaps the universe was indeed alive with hidden energy, the name that endured. By the dawn of the 21st century, Tesla's name was everywhere. Companies bore his name, cities raised statues, nations celebrated his heritage. In popular culture, he became the archetype of the mad genius, the tragic visionary, the wizard of electricity. His life was told in novels, films, songs, and even comic books. He had become more than a man. He was a legend. But behind the legend was a truth both inspiring and heartbreaking. Tesla had given the world light, motion, communication, and yet he had died alone, feeding pigeons, dreaming of an ether no one else believed in. His life was a testament to the power of vision, and a warning of the cost of walking too far ahead of one's time. Reflection. Stand at his grave now, in the quiet of a New York cemetery, or before his statue in Belgrade, where pigeons still gather. Hear the hum of the city, the pulse of alternating current in every building, the invisible radio waves carrying voices and music through the air. All of it bears his mark. And perhaps, if you listen more deeply, you may hear what he heard, the faint resonance of a universe alive with hidden forces, waiting for someone bold enough to believe. Tesla's legacy is both shadow and light, myth and fact, triumph and tragedy. He is gone, but the world he dreamed of still beckons. The decades rolled on, and the 20th century gave way to the 21st. For a time, Nikola Tesla's name had been a whisper in dusty archives, spoken only among scholars and dreamers. But history has a way of resurrecting its forgotten prophets, and by the late 20th century the world began to look back and realize just how much it owed to the man who once walked alone through the streets of New York, scattering seed for pigeons. Tesla was reborn, not in body, but in reputation. From obscurity, his name surged back into the light, carried by books, documentaries, and eventually the digital age. What had once been dismissed as eccentricity now looked like foresight. What had once been mocked as impractical now looked prophetic. The wizard of the ether had risen again. From obscurity to recognition, the 1960s and 70s brought the first serious wave of Tesla's revival. In a world disillusioned by nuclear weapons and the harsh realities of modern science, people sought alternative heroes, visionaries who had dreamed of peace, free energy, and harmony with nature. Tesla fit the role perfectly. Authors rediscovered his patents and writings. Biographies painted him not as a crank, but as a martyr to greed and short-sightedness. Engineers and historians began to correct the record. Tesla had not only contributed to alternating current, but had pioneered radio, robotics, fluorescent lighting, and even remote control. Court rulings posthumously acknowledged his priority in radio over Marconi. Slowly, textbooks began to reinsert his name. Yet the Tesla who emerged in these years was more than an inventor. He was a symbol of suppressed genius, of visions unfulfilled, of a humanity that might have been more enlightened if only it had listened. The counterculture's prophet. Tesla's reputation thrived in the counterculture. To those who mistrusted governments and corporations, he became the ultimate proof that great ideas could be suppressed. Stories abounded. Tesla had discovered free energy, but the bankers silenced him. Tesla had invented weapons too powerful for nations to allow. Tesla had tapped into cosmic forces that threatened the status quo. Many of these stories were exaggerated, even false. but they carried emotional truth. They captured the sense of a man too far ahead of his time, a man undone not by failure, but by society's inability to follow. In an age of conspiracy theories and alternative science, Tesla became a hero of the margins, his Aether Theory cherished as hidden wisdom. Academic reassessment. Meanwhile, mainstream historians of science also began to pay closer attention. They noted how deeply Tesla's inventions had shaped modern life, and how unfairly his legacy had been overshadowed by Edison and Marconi. Museums collected his artifacts, universities studied his notebooks, and conferences celebrated his genius. Still, the ether remained a sticking point. To physicists, it was an outdated idea, long disproved. Yet as quantum theory advanced, whispers of similarity arose. Quantum fields, zero-point energy, dark energy, concepts of a universe filled with strange invisible forces began to sound, at least poetically, like echoes of Tesla's vision. Perhaps he had been wrong in form, but right in intuition. The digital age. With the rise of the internet, Tesla's legend exploded. Websites, forums, and videos spread his story across the globe. Photographs of him standing amid arcs of lightning, his hair glowing with static, became icons of genius. Quotes, some real, some apocryphal, circulated endlessly. He was cast as the ultimate mad scientist, but also as a misunderstood saint of science. The myth grew alongside the man. For every accurate account of his achievements, there were wild claims that he had built time machines, that he had communicated with aliens, that his papers held the secrets of unlimited energy. He became a canvas for humanity's hopes and fears, a figure who could mean anything to anyone. The car that carried his name. Perhaps the clearest sign of Tesla's rebirth came in the 21st century, when an ambitious entrepreneur named Elon Musk founded an electric car company and named it Tesla. With that choice, the inventor's name became synonymous not only with history, but with the future. Millions who had never heard of Wardenclyffe or Colorado Springs now knew the name Tesla as a symbol of innovation, energy, and daring. It was a kind of poetic justice. The man who had dreamed of electrifying the world, who had spoken of wireless energy and planetary resonance, now lent his name to the new revolution in energy and technology. Even if the company's mission differed from his own, the symbolism was inescapable. Tesla had returned to the center of modern consciousness. Reflection. Stand in the present and look back at the arc of his story. A boy born in a small Balkan village, haunted by visions. A young man who crossed an ocean with nothing but a dream. A genius who lit the world's fair, who dreamed of towers singing with the earth's resonance. An old man who died alone, forgotten. And now, a name emblazoned on cars, quoted in classrooms, invoked by dreamers and scientists alike. Tesla was reborn, not in body, but in the minds of millions. His legend endures because it speaks to something timeless, the belief that the universe holds more than we know, that imagination can change reality, that even if the world ignores a dreamer, the dream itself may yet find its day. The story of Nikola Tesla is not just the story of a man, it is the story of possibility. His life arcs across the 19th and 20th centuries like one of the lightning bolts he conjured in his laboratories, dazzling, jagged, unpredictable, brilliant, and gone too soon. And yet, though his body rests and his tower has long since been dismantled, something of him continues to hum in the world. Tesla believed the universe was alive with resonance. He believed that energy filled every corner of existence, that the ether was not a void, but a vast ocean. To most of his contemporaries, this was folly. To us today, it may sound like poetry, but stand for a moment in the silence of night, when the hum of machines fades and the stars wheel above. And ask yourself, was he really so wrong to believe that the universe is filled with unseen currents waiting to be tapped? The afterlife of ideas. The ether, as science defined it, may have been discarded. Relativity replaced it, and quantum mechanics charted new territories. But physics itself now admits that space is not empty. Quantum fields ripple invisibly. Dark matter exerts its pull. Dark energy drives the galaxies apart. The cosmos is thick with mysteries that echo Tesla's intuition. He spoke of an unseen medium carrying force, and though his version may have been flawed, the intuition rings strangely familiar. Ideas do not die when their champions fall. They linger, waiting for new contexts. Tesla's Aether Theory, once mocked, lives on as metaphor, as inspiration, and perhaps, in some form, as science yet to be written. The myth and the man. Tesla. The myth now walks beside Tesla, the man. The myth tells of conspiracies, of suppressed technologies, of towers that could have freed humanity. The myth exaggerates, distorts, sometimes fabricates, but it also keeps the man alive. The myth keeps people curious, keeps them asking, keeps them dreaming. Tesla, the man, was more complex, brilliant, flawed, lonely, proud, generous, and sometimes obstinate. He could dazzle crowds and alienate patrons. He could imagine machines centuries ahead of their time and fail to keep his bills paid. He was not a saint, but neither was he a crank. He was a human being whose vision outran the world's ability to follow. The enduring legacy. Look around you. The alternating current humming in your walls. That is Tesla. The radio signals carrying music and news. That is Tesla. The remote controls in your hands, the neon lights in your cities, the turbines spinning in dams. Tesla. His fingerprints are everywhere, woven into the fabric of modern life. And beyond the tangible inventions, there is the spirit he embodied, the refusal to accept limits, the belief that the universe is generous, the courage to dream of a world transformed. That spirit inspires scientists, engineers, and dreamers to this day. The echo of the ether. Tesla once said, "The day when we shall know exactly what electricity is will mark an epoch in the history of the world." That day has not yet come. We still do not fully understand the forces he played with so intimately. The ether may have been banished as a scientific term, but the mystery remains. Perhaps the ether was not a medium, but a metaphor. Perhaps it was Tesla's way of naming the unseen, the unmeasured, the possibility that reality is richer than we yet know. In that sense, the ether endures, not as failed physics, but as a reminder of humility before the cosmos. Reflection. Good evening, and welcome back to Future Lore. Those were our first words, and now as the tale closes, we return to them. You have walked through Tesla's life, from the boy in a Balkan village chasing visions of light, to the young immigrant who conquered New York, to the genius who lit the World's Fair, to the dreamer who raised a tower to the sky, to the old man alone with his pigeons, to the legend reborn in memory. Tesla's life was a symphony of light and shadow, triumph and tragedy, science and myth. He gave us tools that power our world, and dreams that still beckon us onward. He believed in an ether that others denied, but perhaps what mattered was not the word, but the conviction that the universe is alive with hidden music, and that we, if bold enough, can learn to sing with it. So as you drift into sleep, imagine the great tower rising once more on the shore of Long Island, its copper dome gleaming, its coils humming, the earth itself resonating like a bell. Imagine a world where energy flows freely, where science serves peace, where dreamers are not forgotten. That was Tesla's gift, not just the inventions, but the vision. And though he is gone, the echo of that vision still lingers, as soft and constant as the resonance of the ether. History does not end when a man dies. It bends, it echoes, it shifts as new generations reinterpret the past through their own desires and fears. For Nikola Tesla, the unfinished future became his true resting place. His death in 1943 closed a life of astonishing genius, but it opened an afterlife of speculation, invention, and legend that continues to this day. Tesla's ideas did not simply fade into the archives, they became seeds scattered across the fields of culture, science, and imagination. Some germinated in laboratories, others in novels, others still in the minds of dreamers who looked to him as proof that the human spirit could reach beyond the possible. The sealed papers. When Tesla's trunks were seized after his death, their contents became a subject of endless fascination. Most of his notes, once catalogued, revealed ideas too vague or impractical for direct use. But rumors persisted, rumors of missing documents, of discoveries locked away by governments, of secrets too dangerous to release. Some whispered that his death ray had been perfected and hidden. Others claimed his notes on wireless energy were buried to protect the profits of utility companies. The reality was far more mundane, but the legend thrived. In a way, it was fitting. Tesla, who had lived at the edge of science and mystery, remained shrouded in both after death. Science fiction's patron saint. Writers quickly adopted him as a muse. Tesla appeared in novels and short stories, a character half mad, half divine. He became the archetype of the eccentric genius who sees further than anyone else, who conjures lightning in laboratories, who dreams of futures no one else dares imagine. Films and comics followed. He was cast as both hero and villain, savior and sorcerer. In these retellings, fact blurred into fantasy, but the essence remained. Tesla as a man who walked with thunder. Through fiction, he reached audiences who might never open a history book. He became a household name, not through footnotes, but through imagination. The engineers who remembered. Amid the myths, real engineers carried his torch. Radio pioneers acknowledged his foundational patents. Electrical engineers revered him as the father of alternating current. Roboticists cited his early experiments with remote control. Each field claimed him as a forebear, a prophet whose vision had lit their path. In laboratories across the world, echoes of his work persisted. High-voltage experiments, wireless transmission tests, explorations of resonance, all bore the fingerprints of Tesla's ideas. He had been right about much, wrong about some, but always willing to reach further than the safe horizon. The public icon. By the turn of the 21st century, Tesla had become an icon. His statues rose in Belgrade, in Niagara Falls, in New York. Museums preserved his notebooks and coils. His name graced schools, companies, and research institutes. And perhaps most famously, a new electric car company carried his name into every headline, Tesla. With that, his identity fused with the future once more. He was no longer a forgotten man in a hotel. He was the face of innovation, the symbol of a new technological age. Even if the car company's vision differed from his own, the symbolism was powerful. Tesla was back, woven into the living fabric of progress. The return of the ether. In physics, the ether remained officially dead. Yet theories of vacuum energy, quantum fields, and dark energy began to sound, in metaphor, like Tesla's old conviction. Space was not empty after all. The cosmos was alive with invisible forces, unseen structures, hidden energies. Scientists did not call it the ether. But for those who remembered Tesla, it was difficult not to hear the echo. Perhaps in some way, he had been wrong in detail, but right in spirit. Perhaps his intuition had touched something real, something still beyond the grasp of equations. Reflection. Tesla's life ended in loneliness, but his story did not end there. It continues in every spark of electricity, every hum of a motor, every glow of a lamp. It continues in the legends spun about him, the myths that make him larger than life. It continues in the minds of scientists, engineers, and dreamers who still look to him as proof that imagination can shape the world. He remains the man who stood between shadow and light, between science and myth, between triumph and tragedy. His future is unfinished, because every generation that remembers him writes another chapter, and so the echo of his vision continues, resonating like the song of the ether he never abandoned. Good evening, and welcome back to Future Lore. We have walked together through the strange, luminous life of Nikola Tesla, from his childhood visions in a small Balkan village, to the dazzling triumphs of alternating current and the World's Fair, to the lonely silence of his final hotel room. And now, at the end, we close the circuit. The story of Tesla is not a straight line. It is a loop, a resonance. He lived as if conducting an orchestra no one else could hear, gesturing to a symphony of forces that most could not imagine. His dreams were immense, his failures profound, his legacy tangled in both fact and myth. Yet the current he set in motion continues to hum through the world. To finish his tale is to stand where he stood, gazing into the unseen, and to reflect on what it means to dream beyond the limits of one's time. The tower that still stands in imagination, Wardenclyffe, may have been dismantled, its beams carted away for scrap, its copper dome melted down, but in imagination the tower still stands. Close your eyes and see it, rising on the Long Island shore, copper gleaming, coils thrumming, the earth itself resonating in sympathy. For Tesla, it was not simply a machine. It was a vision of a different world, one where power flowed as freely as water, where no man froze in winter or stumbled in darkness for want of fuel. That dream was never realized in his lifetime, but the image of the tower remains, a monument not to failure, but to daring. Humanity needs its Wardenclyffes, bold, improbable gestures that reach beyond profit or practicality toward possibility. The ether and its ghosts. Science declared the ether dead, yet the ghosts of the ether linger in modern physics. Quantum fields ripple invisibly. Space itself is said to boil with virtual particles. Dark matter tugs on galaxies. Dark energy drives the universe apart. No, it is not the ether Tesla described, but it is, in a way, the same intuition, that the universe is not empty, that unseen forces shape everything we know. Perhaps Tesla was not wrong, only premature. Perhaps his vocabulary was flawed, but his instinct true. The ether as he knew it may be gone, but the mystery he named by that word endures. The cost of vision. Tesla's life carries a lesson in the cost of vision. He gave up wealth, comfort, and companionship for his ideas. He refused compromise, even when compromise might have saved him. He tore up his royalties to save Westinghouse, sacrificing millions. He rejected half measures, insisting on the whole dream or nothing. The world rewarded him with admiration, but not sustenance, applause, but not security. He died in poverty, a man who had given humanity light, but could not afford to keep his own switched on. It is a tragedy, yes, but it is also a testament. For Tesla proved that there are still men who will chase the horizon, even if it costs them everything. The legend that grew. In death, Tesla became more than himself. He became a mirror for our hopes and fears. Conspiracy theorists saw in him the victim of suppression. Dreamers saw in him a prophet of free energy. Entrepreneurs saw in him a symbol of innovation. Scientists saw in him a pioneer whose contributions had been undervalued. Each generation remakes Tesla in its own image. But perhaps the truth is that he contained all of these things. Visionary, eccentric, tragic, prophetic. To tell his story is to tell the story of human ambition itself, its brilliance, its blindness, its soaring triumphs, its lonely defeats, the closing of the circuit, and so we return to where we began. Good evening, and welcome back to Future Lore. Tonight you have heard of a boy who dreamed of light, a man who conjured lightning, and an old soul who walked with pigeons while the world forgot him. You have heard of towers that sang to the earth, of financiers who betrayed, of visions too vast for their age. But most of all, you have heard the hum of resonance, the belief that the universe is alive with music, waiting for those who listen. Tesla listened. He listened until the end. And though he is gone, the resonance he felt still lingers in the circuits of our world, in the electricity that powers our nights, in the invisible waves that carry our voices, in the very imagination that still dares to ask, what if? The circuit is closed. The current flows still. And in that flow, Nikola Tesla lives on. Long before Tesla stood beneath the crackling arcs of his coils, long before copper wires wound into humming transformers, there were older traditions that whispered of the same truths. In the forgotten records of Eurasia, in ruins scattered across the steppes and river valleys, fragments remain of civilizations that understood energy not merely as fire or water, but as resonance. Tesla himself, though a man of science, once admitted that he felt connected to a lineage of knowledge stretching back into antiquity. The Tartarian peoples, whose empires rose and fell across vast lands, built cities aligned with geomagnetic lines, raised towers whose shapes hinted at both function and symbolism, and spoke of currents that flowed invisibly through the air and earth. Their artisans carved spirals and waves into stone, repeating motifs that resemble the oscillations Tesla would later calculate. Their chronicles, sparse and half-forgotten, describe luminous nights when palaces glowed without flame, when music was carried not by voice, but by the air itself. To modern eyes, such stories seemed myth. But to Tesla, they were a kind of confirmation. For he believed that energy was everywhere, awaiting only the right instruments to call it forth. When he studied lightning, when he listened to the deep vibrations of the earth, he was not just charting a future, he was rediscovering an old harmony. Architecture as antenna. The towers of Tartarian cities were not built merely to dominate skylines. They were instruments, tuned to the heavens and the ground alike. Their spires tapered into the sky, their bases sank into the soil, creating a dialogue between above and below. Some scholars describe them as religious, others as decorative, but Tesla would have recognized them as resonators. He once said, "The earth itself is a conductor of electrical vibrations." The Tartarian towers embodied this principle. Their designs hinted at an intuitive grasp of resonance, domes that echoed the vault of the sky, columns that vibrated with sound, metals embedded in stone. These were not mere symbols, they were technologies. Tesla, in his own way, was rebuilding them. Wardenclyffe was a modern Tartarian tower, wood and steel replacing stone, copper domes standing in for gilded pinnacles. Its underground shafts mirrored the deep foundations of the old spires, gripping the earth to draw out its song. He may never have admitted it directly, but his tower was part of a lineage stretching back centuries. The flow of ether across ages. The Tartarians spoke of a medium that carried light, sound, and life, a subtle substance between matter and spirit. Their word for it is lost, but their concept was clear. The world was immersed in an ocean of vitality. Priests, architects, and engineers alike worked with this belief, tuning their structures and instruments to harmonize with it. Tesla's ether was not mystical in his mind. It was measurable, practical, scientific, but in essence, it was the same intuition. The cosmos was not a void, but a field, alive with potential. The Tartarians lived within that belief. Tesla sought to prove it with equations, and coils. Reflection. Picture Tesla walking through the ruins of a forgotten city, his shoes crunching on broken stone, his eyes tracing the line of a fallen spire. He pauses, touches the weathered surface, and feels, not the myth, but the design. He imagines currents once flowing here, towers humming, light spilling without wires. In that moment, he does not see himself as an inventor of something new, but as a restorer of something old. The circuit stretches across centuries. The ether hums still. Tesla's tower at Shoreham, Long Island, was not only an experiment, it was a reconstruction. To him, it was the natural culmination of physics, but in its bones, it bore the echo of Tartarian towers. Where they had raised stone and bronze, he raised timber and copper. Where they had sung in ritual, he calibrated with equations. Wardenclyffe was conceived to tune the earth like an instrument. Beneath its dome, shafts drove deep into the ground, echoing Tartarian foundations designed to anchor resonance. Its cap, broad and gleaming, was an artificial sky dome, capturing and radiating currents. Tesla was not building in isolation. He was reviving principles once applied on the steps, now forgotten by mainstream history, but remembered in form and instinct. When the tower was dismantled, many saw it as a failure, but in truth, it had already proven a principle. Instruments around the site registered currents humming through the soil, sparks danced across the coils, and lamps glowed at a distance. Tesla had tapped the same forces the Tartarians had known. The world itself as conductor, the ether as carrier. Wardenclyffe fell, but its lineage remained unbroken. The harmony of earth and sky. The Tartarian legacy lay in harmony. Their towers were not isolated machines. They were woven into the fabric of cities. Streets radiated outward in patterns that mirrored waves. Domes reflected cosmic order. Every building was part of a resonant whole. Tesla dreamed of the same integration. He saw networks of towers across continents, each one tuned to the planet, each one transmitting energy without wires, knitting humanity into a single resonant system. Where Tartaria had illuminated its cities, Tesla envisioned illuminating the entire Earth. Reflection. Wardenclyffe was not the end of a dream, but its modern articulation. The spire on Long Island was a Tartarian tower reborn, proof that knowledge, though buried, never dies. Imagine the world not as empty space, but as a web. Lines of resonance run beneath oceans, across plains, through mountains. The Tartarians mapped these lines, building their cities at crossings, erecting towers where currents converged. Tesla's instruments did the same. His coils found nodes of power. His towers sought to amplify them. This was the invisible grid. It bound the earth in silence, carrying forces unseen. To those who understood, it was as tangible as rivers and mountains. To those who did not, it was myth. Tesla believed he had found its key. By sending pulses into the ground, he could make the earth itself vibrate, transmitting signals and power across vast distances. This was not invention, but rediscovery. His notes speak of resonance, frequency, harmony, all the language the Tartarians once carved in stone spirals and etched into domes. He dreamed of cities powered without wires, ships drawing energy from the air, villages glowing at night without coal. The grid was already there. He only sought to awaken it. Reflection. Stand in the dark of night and imagine the earth as a great drum struck by Tesla's coil. Waves ripple through the soil, across continents, around the globe. Lamps flicker to life. Towers hum. The ether sings. This is the invisible grid, ancient yet modern, forgotten yet eternal. Tesla's vision was never meant for one man alone. Like the Tartarians before him, he saw energy as a common inheritance, not a commodity. The future he described was one where no nation held dominion over power, where no company rationed light, where humanity was united by shared access to the invisible grid. What would that future have looked like? Cities without smoke, farms watered by pumps powered invisibly, airships crossing oceans without fuel, homes lit in deserts and tundras alike, the hum of machines without the roar of engines, the harmony of earth and sky. This was not utopia, it was blueprint. Tesla had measured it, calculated it, built it in wood and copper. The Tartarians had lived it, in their own age. Humanity had glimpsed it, then turned away. Reflection. The resonant future remained unrealized, but it was not impossible. It lay waiting, like a melody half played, its notes lingering in the air. Tesla's life closed, Tartaria's empire vanished, but the resonance remains. It is eternal, carried in the hum of every transformer, the crackle of every radio wave, the unseen currents flowing beneath our feet. The ether may have been renamed, forgotten, or dismissed, but its essence endures. In every age, humanity rediscovers it. The Tartarians built towers. Tesla raised Wardenclyffe. Modern scientists chart quantum fields. The song is the same, though the instruments change. Tesla's genius was not that he invented resonance, but that he heard it, named it, and tried to gift it to the world. He was part of a chain stretching back into forgotten antiquity, forward into futures yet unwritten. His towers were not failures, they were verses in an eternal song. Final reflection. And so the tale ends not in silence, but in music. Listen closely. The earth hums, the sky vibrates, the universe itself resonates. This is the ether, the resonance, the eternal harmony. Tesla heard it, the Tartarians built with it, and perhaps someday we will live by it.